Let me also get your take on what's going on in terms of world affairs. The White House has issued a statement on this saying that there's no indication of a nefarious intent in the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The ship involved in the collapse of the bridge is 948 feet long, called the Dolly, a Singaporean flagged container. But of course, you've been talking a lot about the potential for wrongdoing or potential for foul play given the wide open border. That is why you have been so adamant.
Wait, what?
Why has the Republicans had such a hard time securing this border? The president says he's not going to take executive action. You know that.
Well, we all have to stand together. We all have to say that it takes 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate. And so Republicans have to stand together and say, look, we're not going to do anything else unless we secure the border.
I guess border means the shore on the eastern seaboard.
I'm wondering if this is going to stoke inflation again. Because let's face it, you know, it's expensive to be transporting all of these goods. And we saw what happened in the Red Sea when the ships were getting attacked. Is this another element to watch in terms of the potential for inflation stoking again?
Every time transportation goes off, it's going to get passed on to you as the consumer. It impacts the poorest families in this country the most.
Okay.
It's always going to happen.
All right, Senator, good to talk with you. Thanks very much for joining me, even as we went back and forth to the live pictures. FBI in Baltimore saying no indication of terrorism this morning. Rick Scott, thank you. We'll be right back.
That was Fox News' Maria Bartiromo and U.S. Senator from Florida, Rick Scott, looking like the ghost of bridges past, talking about the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. For even worse takes, here's Newsmax.
We do have these infrastructure bills, lots of money in it. I mean, I've been under bridges. They're horrible to look at. You look and you see rust. If you drive over bridges, you see things you are like, am I going to make it over this? The bridges are definitely old. The roads are old. But why, after all these bills, after all the money, do we still have really old bridges and really old roads?
Because we're not spending it on roads and bridges.
Right.
Look at the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was done a couple of years ago that the left hails as this massive success, but it was mostly Green New Deal. Actually, in that bill, $110 billion went to surface transportation, which is roads and bridges, and of that $110 billion, $70 billion went to public transportation, leaving only $40 billion for traditional roads and bridges, what you and I think about.
I don't know if South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace is advocating for President Biden to spend more money on infrastructure or admitting that a Republican politician wouldn't do anything to help. Either way, I hope this isn't her boasting about a grant to improve transportation in her district that she voted against.
You look at our critical infrastructure, and I'm one of these people that believes we've never fully come out of all the lockdowns and the COVID issues. And you can look at whether you look at our air traffic controllers, where we have critical mission problems with filling slots. You know, I'm no expert on what's going on the seas, but all I would say is that if you talk to employers in America, they'll tell you that filling slots with employees who aren't drug-addled is a very huge problem.
So we got lockdowns, COVID issues, drug-addled, whatever that means. And of course, on social media, DEI. Key Bridge is named after Francis Scott Key, the man who wrote our national anthem. Symbolic for sure. Was it intentional? Lots of questions with this one. I guess one of the questions is, did anti-white business practices cause this disaster? What I want to know is, do y'all know how black Baltimore County in Maryland is? As was alluded to earlier, blame was shifted to Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. But here's what we know so far. Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, declared a state of emergency and said that his office was in close communication with Buttigieg. The White House issued a statement saying that Biden has been briefed on the collapse. According to the New York Times, the ship is a 954-foot-long cargo vessel named Dali. The owner of the vessel, a Singapore-flagged ship, said it hit a pillar of the bridge around 1:30 a.m. All crew members, including 2 pilots on board, have been accounted for, and there were no injuries on the ship. Meanwhile, 6 construction workers remained missing Tuesday morning. Evidently, the ship's crew notified authorities that they had lost power shortly before it struck the bridge. Here is sped up video footage of the vessel hitting the bridge. It looks like power was lost twice before the collision. And if right-wing media wants to slippery slope themselves into blaming Democrats or DEI, why not include the fact that this week was also the anniversary of the Shirtwaist Fire Factory or the tanker crashing in the Suez Canal? The Silver Bridge here in Ohio collapsed in the 60s without a ship running into it. Kind of seems like that's the reason why money has been and still needs to be invested in infrastructure. And if any bill were to somehow be the reason for this tragedy in Baltimore, Maryland, thousands of miles away from the southern border, who do we blame?
Look, think of what the Republicans are doing, for example, Kevin, on the border issue. They said that they wouldn't pass aid to Ukraine and other places unless there was action on the border. So the Senate produced a bill negotiated by one of its most conservative Republican members on the border, which had some defects in it, as compromise measures always do. And it was nonetheless the strongest border protection bill that I've seen in my time in Washington. And the House simply announced it was not going to take it up, so it failed even in the Senate.
2 people have been rescued and the search is ongoing, that per CBS News, and there were reports that up to 20 vehicles were crossing the bridge at the time of the incident. Again, could have been more if May Day wasn't declared by crew members who remained on board of the vessel, giving authorities time to block both sides of the bridge. The mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, officially declared a local state of emergency in response to the collapse of Key Bridge. He said, quote, "Our teams are mobilizing resources and working swiftly to address this crisis and ensure the safety and well-being of our community."
Everyone, this is a unthinkable tragedy. We have to first and foremost pray for all of those who are impacted, those families. Pray for our first responders and thank them, all of them working together.
There is untold amount of damage to not only the bridge, but infrastructure, the supply chain, and that state's economy, which will have ripple effects for the rest of this country. However, we cannot put a price on those lives that were lost. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has stated, "I have directed my team to move heaven and earth to reopen the port and rebuild the bridge as soon as humanly possible. It is my intention that the federal government will pay for the entire cost reconstructing that bridge." Adding, "We're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. And I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild this port together. Everything so far indicates that this was a terrible accident."
You plan to go to Baltimore, sir? And if so, how quickly?
I do, and as quickly as I can. That's what
You said the federal government's also going to pay for the repairs. I'm just curious, this was a ship that appears to be at fault. Is there any reason to believe that the company behind the ship should be held responsible? And then also, you
that
mentioned
could be, but we're not going to wait for that to happen. We're going to pay for it to get the bridge rebuilt and opened.
What did you make of Israel's decision not to attend this meeting this week?
Oh, I don't want to get into that. We've got plenty of time to talk about Ralph.
You mentioned the port. Can I ask about cars? About the port.
For Really American, I'm Jeff Wiggins. My architect knows Japanese.